This is the Atheist Guide to Spiritual Awakening. I'm your host Walter, and today's episode is about healing the unbroken or how to reprogram your mind. The unbroken part of the title of this episode is very important to me because you are not broken, and the programming that your mind underwent brought you so far in life. So it was functional and serving you. And it's also very important to realize that life will change, your circumstances will change, and you will learn new things, develop new behaviors, and continue programming, quote unquote, yourself. So the goal is to try to be as flexible as possible and not to reach some kind of perfect state of enlightenment or whatever sounds perfect to you. Before we dig into the weeds on how to reprogram the mind, I would like to remind you a little bit how we can imagine a general model of the mind working. So some internal or external triggers come in. So for instance, you see someone or you feel something or an idea pops into your head, and it is matched against old patterns which you learned throughout your life. This pattern contains a narrative. Why is it a good way to react like that? This pattern also contains some actions. Okay, if I see a friend, I say hi. And other images and visuals that could come up with the pattern. Depending on when we learn those patterns, those triggers and actions and narratives that are associated, the reaction can be casual, simple, everyday life reaction, or even in the moment reaction, like if I hit my foot against something, then I turn a little bit to avoid it. Or it can be extremely intense with its share of emotions and narratives that suddenly flood our brains. It's maybe interesting also to note that everything happens in the moment. Your whole past created a structure in your mind that is your current self. The whole day or week or months that you are in created the internal emotional state that you are in, and something new happens that is coming from the outer world that is also happening in this moment. So many of the triggers that lead to some behavior are completely functional. All of the routines that you have for your job, for driving a car, for riding a bike, for cooking, for interacting with people, many of those are okay. There's no problem with them. So what we will be focusing here are triggers and patterns and behaviors that you are not happy with. Now, I don't want to have any moral opinion on how anyone behaves because first of all, everyone leads a completely different life, and on the other hand, everyone has a completely different past than me. So the question that I want you to ask yourself is, what are my behaviors that do not serve me in everyday life? Am I getting angry at very small things without understanding why? Am I getting scared by things that do not seem after the event happens to be very important? Am I developing unhealthy relationships with a certain category of people? Are there certain situations where I'm completely blocked by an unexplainable, irrational fear? Or on the other extreme, are there circumstances where I don't understand why I don't control myself a bit better and make a fool out of myself? These are the things that we are talking about when we talk about healing or reprogramming the mind, because these are the ones we are not happy with. For the sake of this discussion, I will use the word reprogramming for anything, whether it's a trauma or an unhealthy behavior or anything, because except for some minor differences, everything is a little bit the same, whether it's an acquired behavior that is not serving you, or whether it's trauma-based behavior that is completely dysfunctional. These are only gradients of the same behavior of the mind. The only thing which distinguishes really certain types of trauma-based reactions from your everyday behavior is if some parts of yourself, what we will call the personas, are fragmenting away to such an extent that when the behavior is triggered, you completely lose control in the moment and have issues remembering after the fact what happened. For those types of problematic behaviors, the same techniques can be applied, but I would like to advise you to use your own judgment before working with your own mind. And if you are under medical treatment, consult with your professional before playing too much with your brain, especially if you consider that the triggered behavior can be dangerous for yourself or others. This is a high-level description of some methods and processes, and you need to apply your own judgment before applying it to yourself. In a previous episode, I think I mentioned that how biological memory works is that whenever we access a memory, this memory gets restored after we finished reliving it. And this is where the key to reprogramming and healing is. So, for the sake of this discussion, let's take a mid-level problematic behavior, which is the need to over-explain yourself. Maybe, as a child, you had a bit stubborn parents, and whatever you were telling them about your needs, your wishes, or your opinions was completely discarded, and you internalized that the only way to make yourself heard is to explain and explain and explain and over-explain. And it can even seem that it's a natural thing that everyone does, but maybe you notice at some stage that people seem to be uncomfortable around you when you explain yourself too much. This is just an example, so apply whatever fits your situation for your personal case. So how would we manage this kind of behavior to improve our, in this case, our social connections? Well, the idea is to try to be in a meditative state, so sitting in the seat of the watcher, and to try to bring up as much as possible of those events that created this behavior. So try to visualize where you were in the discussions, in one of the discussions with your parents. Try to feel how you felt. If you didn't feel anything, that might have been that you bottled the feelings, so try to imagine how you should have felt when you were ignored. Try to visualize how your parents looked like, whether they were angry, whether they were condescending, whether they were just closed off or impatient. Try to bring as much as possible of the scene up and relive it. Once you did that a couple of times calmly and are sure that you can hold the observer seat, try to insert your adult self into the situation. Meaning, for instance, you were sitting on a chair, try to stand next to yourself, next to the child that you were, and hold the child by the shoulder. Make the child feel comfortable, and try to re-explain to that child what is going on with an adult voice. So, for instance, tell the child, look, Dad is extremely tired. He's coming back from work. He doesn't have the patience to do this conversation with you. He just wants you to do as he wishes, so it simplifies his life. He's not right to do that, but you can see that this can happen. And I tell you as an adult that I have my days where I'm tired and I don't want to enter into conversations that last too long when I'm already exhausted. Look at mom. She seems to be a bit silent in this conversation. Maybe she doesn't know how to contradict dad. Maybe dad has a bit of a temper and he doesn't like to be interrupted. She should have maybe helped you be understood, but she is also doing her best because, well, she had a past programming like you do, and she didn't know how to change that behavior. What happens when you do this kind of exercise of being the watcher, being the adult, and talking to your inner child is that you are basically rewriting the memory of the event with exactly what happened, plus the new adult narrative that you're putting on it. In a nutshell, that's what works for me. Now, there are other techniques that are more based on working with your energies and finding in your body where the trauma is stored and how it is impacting your mind. But those ones I don't use and I don't know how to use, so you can Google them or write me in the comment if you want me to do a bit of research on the topic. Now, you might wonder where to start. If you have many things in your life that you are not happy with, then it might be difficult to know where to start, which behavior to investigate, which memory to access from your childhood or from your past. And it might even be difficult for you to know which behavior is dysfunctional or not. Actually, it's when we are in total confusion about which behavior is functional or not that it's the most difficult, because if we can't see that our ways are not helping our life, then it means that we have developed not only a trigger associated to some patterns with a simple narrative on them and an automatic response that we apply, but we also developed protection mechanisms that self-justify the behavior because it was so much needed to have that behavior come out every single time for our own protection that the mind developed scaffoldings around the behavior to prevent us from removing it and be again in danger if the event is more dangerous than what we are discussing here. What I would advise is to start with something where you know it's not the right way of behaving. So look at the last time you got triggered to the point where after the fact you said, what the hell did I even do there? I don't understand myself. Starting somewhere is very important because first of all it will train you to do this work, and second of all the more problems or dysfunctional patterns and triggers and behaviors you fix, the more you will find the interesting and deeply impacting ones that will become easier to access but also to manage. Now there is another tricky bit in what I just said, which is that it's not always easy to know why today I'm behaving in a certain way. I made it quite almost like an automatic pass from current behavior to childhood experience or past experience, but maybe we don't actually know where the problem root is or where this behavior got put in place or reinforced. My way of looking or tracing back current behavior to past event is to try to investigate the latest triggered, weird, unhealthy behavior that I had, and to loosely go back in the past and see, did something happen at some time which looked a little bit like that, that resembled some of my current situation, but also looking at how my parents, the friends of my parents, the adult authority, my school friends, and other people in my life interacted with me? Did I associate my father with a authority figure, so some of my behaviors towards other authority figures like the state are impacted by what I learned from him? Do I have an idea where I developed the model of the mind for, say, love, for guilt, for shame, for fear, for anger and other feelings, something I can trace back to something? So it's really a detective work that we are doing with our own past and our own mind. It's also helpful in order to understand what's going on when, to understand what is the reason to be for feelings, positive and negative feelings. Our current society either goes to the extreme where we say that feelings are everything and there's only lived experience and feelings, or that feelings do not care about reality and that only logic applies. I strongly disagree with both extremes on this scale, because feelings are the reason we do anything. If we wouldn't have, for instance, curiosity or excitement or fear or sadness or pain, we would never move. We would not be motivated to do anything. So feelings are the fuel for moving and evolving and interacting with the world. And thoughts are obviously necessary for analyzing situations, coming to conclusions, and doing anything. But both thoughts and feelings are based on past experiences and how we internalize them. So neither of them is right or wrong. They are as good as our training was. So let's investigate some feelings and try to understand what is their reason to be. Let's start with an obvious one: fear. Well, in our distant past, when we evolved as humans, fear was most probably the most useful feeling, because if we were meeting with a bear, it was a good idea to decide what to do very fast and in the moment and not to cuddle with him. So being afraid of wild animals, being afraid of fire, being afraid of cold was very much needed to be able to survive. In our modern society, there are also reasons to be afraid that are very concrete and in the moment, which are obvious, like not jumping in front of a car, hiding somewhere if there's a shooting, trying not to be crushed by a crowd in a concert. I mean, there are very, very many reasons that we should be afraid and that fear is very helpful. But we don't live only in the moment. We are also building scenarios about the future continuously. We think about what will happen, and we can be afraid of things that are not happening now, but that might happen in the future. And those kind of fears are sometimes useful, but if they are constantly occupying our mind, this is what we call anxiety. And anxiety is not helping anything. It doesn't help us to be smarter, and it tends to make each of the next scenarios that we build in our mind to be more dangerous looking than it is, the more afraid or anxious we are. On the other extreme of the scale between negative and positive feelings, there is love. Well, the Greeks had, I think, 12 different kinds of love. I will talk about the love that the Buddhists are using, which is the feeling that wants us to take care of others. It goes together with our ability to have empathy, to feel what the other person experiences, while subtle cues from what we read from the other person, which Buddhists call compassion. And love and compassion together are what makes us social creatures that interact with other people in a positive way. Actually, we could even say that all negative feelings are fear-based and all positive feelings are love-based. Love in the sense that I just mentioned. So let's look at another fear-based emotion, which is guilt. Guilt is the feeling to be afraid of the consequences of some actions that we did. So basically, I break a glass. I know that this glass was the favorite glass of my partner. I feel guilty because I'm afraid that this will damage in some way the relationship I have with that other person. Guilt is a very important feeling for any social animal like humans, because that is what avoids to do anything that goes against the interests of other important people in our clan, in our tribe. Then there is shame, which is actually one of the strongest negative feeling that we can experience, which is basically the fear of being excluded from the tribe. So it's almost the same as guilt, but before we do something. So shame is the reason we don't go out naked in the street, because what we would feel if we would go out naked would be shame. So anticipating that is the reason we put on clothes before leaving our home, even when it's warm. Then there is sadness. Sadness is a complex feeling that when going to the extreme can be depression, but sadness is basically a signal from the body that we are afraid that what we are doing goes absolutely nowhere. So sadness is a very powerful feeling that if we can face in a constructive way, will help us reflect on what we do and what happens to us in order to find solutions. And the final negative feeling for today is anger. Anger is a little bit of a tricky one, because anger is a compensation feeling for instance, sadness or fear. Without anger, there wouldn't be fight or flight, but there would be also freeze. If we can't activate anger, then maybe the extreme fear of the bear being very close to us already and us not being able to run away would lead us to freeze. If we get angry at the bear, we give us an additional chance to actually turn this very dangerous situation into something we survive. But again, in modern society, we tend to see bears, fire, and other dangerous things into much simpler and not as dangerous events. But since it's this very primal biological mechanism that is activated, our body is preparing for a fight when we get angry. On the positive or love-based emotions, there's a plethora. Some of them that are very important are, first of all, curiosity. Curiosity is a very interesting state of mind, which is actually not that far from anxiety, but it's the positive variation of anxiety. So we are expecting something to happen in the future, and we are excited, curious about how it will turn out. And it's actually such an incredibly positive emotions that when we feel anxious, it's worthwhile to try to change our anxiety into curiosity. Instead of saying, oh my God, something terrible will happen, if we say, I don't know what is going to happen, but I'm curious about what it is, if we say that in our mind, then we will have a much more positive experience waiting for the result of an exam or the phone call from our boss after the evaluation or whatever we are waiting for. Another positive emotion that is very helpful is joy. Joy is the expression of our love for ourselves, because when we are joyful, we basically notice that I love myself I wish the best for myself, and what is going on now is such a great thing for me that I feel joy. Both negatives and positive feelings allow us to learn the things that work and to learn also the things that don't work. So positive feelings are as important as negative ones. We could continue investigating a lot of different feelings, but I just want to go back to some nuances about love, compassion, and one that we didn't discuss, which is inner calm, which is called equanimity in Buddhism. And the interesting thing is that they all come with so-called false friends. So it's similar feelings that feel almost the same as love, compassion, or equanimity, but are negative feelings actually. The evil twin of love is called longing. So it's not the feeling that I want the best for you, is the feeling that I need you to achieve the best for myself. And it's a negative feeling because, first of all, the fact that you feel that is similar to love makes you believe that when it's broken, when the person doesn't deliver to you what you need or want from them, then it's a betrayal. And it's also a negative feeling because whatever you need, you can't expect directly other people to be responsible for satisfying it. You are responsible for your life and no one else. Now, it's nice when other people give you positive experiences, but you can't expect them to do so because they are free people. So, well. The second one, the false friend or the false twin of compassion is pity. When you are compassionate to someone, you're there thinking, oh my God, poor you, you are suffering. Let me help you. When you experience pity, what you say is, oh, poor you, you are in pain. I'm so happy that I'm not in your place. I don't think I need to explain why this is a negative feeling, because basically it builds distance with the other person and will prevent you from wanting to help. And finally, the false friend of equanimity, so of inner calm, is indifference. Instead of saying, I feel everything that is going on around me and react with calm and by staying in the watcher's seat to be in control of my own emotions that are generated by the outer world. Instead of that, I close myself and I don't feel anything, so I'm not connected at all to the other people or to the situations that I'm experiencing. This is a negative feeling also for obvious reasons, because it disconnects you from a social perspective. So try to reflect on these feelings, on what the selective reason for being is, how they help a human be safe, be happy, be connected to others, and use them to investigate whether you felt them when the specific events in your past that you're not happy with happened. If you didn't feel them, what should you have felt, and try to feel them when you revisit the memory. And also use those feelings in today to see, okay, I feel afraid. When is it that I felt afraid in my past? So as a short summary of how I like to do healing work in my own psyche is, first, look at what triggers you. Try to note down in your mind what were the feelings, what were the patterns. Trying to find in your recent or distant past when you felt that way, what were the patterns associated. Does authority look like your father? Does love look like your mother? And what are those associations that you formed in your mind that drive your understanding of the world today? Then if you find the root of some behaviors you're not happy with, go back into the memory, discuss with your inner child, or add yourself into the situation with an adult narrative that is as little as possible based on judgment and as much as possible based off rational understanding of the situation. Explain it to the inner child so that the memory gets restored in a way that is more productive. Before I move on to the final segment of this episode, which is about what you would expect if you manage to do some of the reprogramming we discussed here, I would like to give you some vocabulary in case you dig into other material. I will also link in the show notes some much more detailed explanations by some other people about how to do this work that's of reprogramming yourself, so that you can a bit link together what I discussed here with those other people's information. So first of all, healing from your trauma is often called shadow work. The reason for calling it shadow work is that Carl Jung, a Swiss psychologist that was a contemporary of Freud and lost a little bit the battle of psychiatry, which is a pity because it was actually better than Freud, was saying that there are two parts in the mind. The part that is conscious, which is the light, and the part which is invisible even to ourselves, which is the shadow. So when we try to heal some of our trauma or of our negative programming, what we do is that we shine light on the shadow part, and that's why it's called shadow work. Now, another interesting vocabulary item that is worth noting is what we call the inner child. So the inner child is all the parts that as a child you learned and you didn't revisit since then, and that form together the shadow. So it's that those invisible parts of your personality that can be categorized as personas: the scared me, the ambitious me, the jealous me, the whoever me. All those are stored in the inner child. The inner child carries two very important features for ourselves. First, it's carrying the core wounds. So the core wounds are those traumatic events that led to our current behaviors, but it's also carrying all our ambitions and characteristics that makes us happy. So the excitement and the joy and what is it that we like to do. So we need at the same time to heal the inner child, but also to feed the inner child with positive experiences that we actually always knew that we needed. So be a child, because a child is a happy part of you, and there's nothing wrong with being happy sometimes, even if it sounds a bit ridiculous from an adult perspective. So the final section of this episode that I hope you enjoyed is about what to expect when we close a core wound, which means that we reprogram one of those engrams or patterns, triggers, behaviors, narratives that we explored or that we are not happy with. What can we expect? Well, the first thing is that, funnily enough, life is often repetition. So the same trigger that made us go berserk a week ago might come again, and we suddenly notice that we don't react exactly the same way. We are a little bit calmer. It's important to note when these moments happen, because it reinforces the new learning that we just stored in our memory. When we suddenly are more happy with our own behavior, it reinforces the behavior. The other thing that can happen, especially if it's a very old, very deeply ingrained thing that we change, it is that for some days or even weeks, we feel a bit weird. It feels like many new ideas are coming up in our mind, and that we feel a bit tired, or that we feel a bit fuzzy in the brain. So I want to be clear that this is completely normal, because when I closed one of my biggest core wound, which was abandonment, which was obviously stemming from the suicide of my mother, I honestly thought that I had a stroke. For some days I was feeling completely smeared out in the brain, completely slow, unable to form sentences, and many weird side effects. But it calmed down, and the behaviors that were attached to my abandonment issues never came back. So it was at the end a positive experience. So don't be afraid if it feels a bit weird after you manage to close a core wound. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Atheist Guide to Spiritual Awakening that was dedicated to healing and reprogramming the mind. If you have any questions, comments, please leave them in the comment section, and also rate, share, review, help a podcaster reach its audience. Thanks a lot, and talk to you soon.